So, what is washoku? The simplest definition or description is that it's Japan's indigenous food culture, meaning it's part and parcel of Japan. It's very specific to Japan. But it's a culinary philosophy, and the philosophy has to do with balance and harmony. And those of you who can read the wa of washoku, the two calligraphy that are up there, it means harmony. It's an alternate meaning for the word harmony. So indeed, it's a whole notion about food. The second character is food. So it's a whole notion about balance and harmony. And it's a philosophic set of notions. It's also very practical guidelines. Somebody who practices washoku and creates the meals. And talk a bit more about that in a moment. If you follow those guidelines, it's a fairly simple matter to put together a meal, one that's wholesome, one that is attractive to look at, and very satisfying. Washoku is also used to describe the food that's produced when you're in that washoku mindset. And finally, it's an approach, it's an attitude, it's a set of ideas about food that leads to a notion of kansha, meaning appreciation. And it's appreciation not only for what nature provides, but for clever, resourceful people who take that natural bounty and are able to feed themselves with it. So washoku has many different meanings, and you don't have to choose one or the other. They're sort of all out there at the same time. So I want to start with some of the basics. And when most Japanese speak of washoku, they have in their mind images not unlike what you're seeing up there now. This ichi, ju, san, sai, 1 and 3. If you take a quick bit of visual arithmetic, you'll see 5 things in the place setting. So 1 and 3, the last time I did my arithmetic, only made 4. Why are there 5 things out there? Because gohan, rice, the word gohan means a meal, and it's also the rice that's being served, and so it doesn't need to be part of the arithmetic. It's assumed by everybody to be part of the meal anyway. And the number 4 is not usually favored in Japan because of an unfortunate alternate reading for the word for death. But 1 and 3 isn't 4, it's 1 and 3. You can only imagine that it's 4. So the ichi-ju is the one broth, and the san-sai, the 3 different dishes that are served with it, and rice, but of course. So that's a basic meal pattern, but how do you go about selecting the foods that are going to be there? The top shows you empty dishes, and it's interesting that often when I'm in a hurry and I'm planning a meal, I'll actually go and set up a tray with empty dishes. And as I'm doing that, as I'm pulling them out of the cupboard, I'll have already my meal plan. It's a way of organizing different kinds of foods. So how do you choose what's going to be there already? I have to take a sip of water. What's going to be there and what's not? And that's where this very clever system of goshiki, gomi, goho comes to the rescue. You've got, it sounds like a lot, and I know there's a lot written out there. By the way, in your printed materials is a crib sheet, so don't worry about writing down any of this. Okay? So it looks like an awful lot, but think about it as color, taste or flavor, and way or method. And these things you need to be mindful of as you're deciding what to serve. So the goshiki, or the 5 colors are red, green, yellow, black, and white. And as you can see, the color red probably has the largest range, everything from purple or pink to orange or brown. Aka miso, red miso is really sort of brown color. The reason why the ancients did it that way, and people still benefit from doing it now, is because you get nutritional balance without having to do any complicated arithmetic. If you eat a little bit of every color, it's not an equal time. You don't have to have as much red as you do green, but you need to have something from every color at every meal. It's going to be automatically nutritionally balanced. You don't have to worry about it. So the 5 flavors, the big three are sweet, sour, and salty. And the Japanese identify the other two primarily as bitter, which is interesting because there aren't that many bitter foods in other cuisines, but there are a lot in the Japanese cuisine. And spicy. But the big three are sweet, sour, and salty. And the reason why you need to balance them is to control your appetite appropriately. To avoid food cravings, people who are trying to diet, listen up. The easiest way to control your craving for food is to have balance between sweet, sour, and salty. And anybody who's ever eaten a whole bag of potato chips or osenbei or kakiki and then had to have ice cream can verify that it works that way, or the other way around. You just finished a whole quart of Haagen-Dazs and now you have to have something salty instead. Certainly the sweet and salty, it's very obvious. In the summertime, if you don't have something that's also tart, it's very hard to feel satisfied and to feel that you've had a complete meal. You want to stop eating. The 5 ways have to do with not only providing textural interest, but when you think back to the old-fashioned kitchen, where there was no refrigeration, and there was also not particularly swift transportation. It wasn't easy to get foods from a great distance to be able to eat. You had what you had. And being able to use whatever you had to make a complete meal was a very important skill. It's also interesting that it's an early statement about the eco-environment and not being able to sustain yourself with whatever you found in the immediate area. So the 3 basic big ways of changing food, and these are ways in which you're going to take your ingredient and it's going to change, would be to simmer them. The word niru really is also braising, boiling, blanching. Anything where you're submerging a food in a bubbling liquid would be niru. And that's a major category. Yaku, or searing with heat, could happen in a skillet. It could happen like a teppanyaki. It could be on a grill and a barbecue. And typically the foods that are prepared that way, by that method, are going to be different on the outside than they are on the inside. Things that are prepared by niru, submerging it in a bubbling liquid, are typically the same all the way through. Same color, same texture, same flavor. Seared foods usually have a different flavor, texture, and color on the outside than they do on the inside. Think of a seared steak, for example, where it's rare on the inside and you've got that nice crust on the outside. Steaming is where you've got moist heat surrounding the food, and that's what cooks it. It's different from baking, which wasn't part of the Japanese traditional kitchen. In dry, enclosed heat, it didn't really happen until the Meiji period and experience of Western food methods coming in. So it was never part of the traditional Japanese kitchen. And then you've got ageru, which is, it's interesting in terms of the history that tempura is really a foreign food and fairly recent in the long history of Japanese food, but it's become a signature dish of Japan. Originally, it was the Chinese back in the 7th century, I think, who taught the Japanese about oil in the kitchen, but it really wasn't until the 17th century and the Portuguese with their fried foods that it really took hold. But fried foods, or using oil in terms of cooking, has become part of the Japanese kitchen. And then there's nama, where no heat is applied at all. And that's truly amazing, considering this also was before refrigeration, that you could have the level of kitchen hygiene that you did in Japan to be able to serve raw food that had not been treated by heat at table. It was really a significant difference. So, what are you going to put in your ichiju sansai? Whatever you've got, you might start with, oh gee, I found a wonderful piece of fish at the market today, I'm going to start with that. Well, I'm going to prepare it by yaku. Then I guess I want something that's going to be simmered. Well, maybe I'll do my vegetable in the simmered way. And you pull together your meal by getting the 5 colors, the 5 flavors, and the 5 different ways of changing your ingredients. There are other things that make it even more interesting and can provide interest, and that is the fact fact that Japanese food, washoku, is very sensual. It really engages all of the senses. And most people, when they talk about food, think of smell and taste immediately, and that's pretty obvious. And smell, if you ever have a cold and you can't taste properly, you also know that that affects your ability to experience food as flavorful. Sight, people can say, oh gee, it looks delicious, but most people don't think about touch and sound. And they're very important in the experience of food, and especially in washoku. The touch is really sawaru, or the mouthfeel. And over the many years that I've been teaching Japanese food to non-Japanese people, I can tell you that the biggest hurdle for most people is mouthfeel, not taste, not the flavor of the food. Whether somebody will welcome natto or mochi, it's not the smell, it's the feel of it in their mouth. Konnyaku, koyadofu, all of these foods that have very distinct mouth feel that don't have counterparts outside Japanese food. That's usually the larger set of issues. But the Japanese are often wanting to focus on mouthfeel in a particular meal. And one mouthfeel, for example, crunchy, isn't always good or always bad. Crunchy is great if you've got potato chips. It's not so great if you're eating an omelet and you think it's a piece of shell that got caught in there by mistake. So the actual mouthfeel itself is neither good nor bad. It's the context in which it's being presented. But it's certainly a consideration for most Japanese. And kiku, or the sound of cooking, as food is cooking, many experienced cooks will go by sound as well as by sight and smell. And usually it's the sound of something boiling out they know before it scorches in the pan. Or the sound of sesame seeds popping that will alert you to the fact that it's time to take it away from the heat. And when you're eating also, the sound of the food, again, certain table sounds are more welcome in Japan, like slurping of noodles, than they are elsewhere. I know that my first summer in Shikoku, Sanuki, known for its udon, I loved the noodles, but I kept hiccuping when I tried to eat them the way everybody else was. I had been brought up in a household where you were never supposed to make that kind of noise. And the only way I knew of doing that was to take in a lot of air, and it would start me off on a round of hiccups. So finally I gave up trying to sound good and just ate it to enjoy it. I'm not sure that I'm the best slurper in the world. It's one of those things that sort of is difficult for me to still do, is to slurp noodles properly. But it's definitely part of the experience of eating in Japan. And the other is what I refer to as surf and turf, because every once in a while in an American menu you will get a dish called surf and turf. It's usually steak and shrimp. Yeah. But that notion of sourcing your food from different terrain is very much a part of washoku and the history of Japanese food. And for the Japanese, they refer to it as the bounty of the sea, umi no sachi, and the bounty of the mountains, yama no sachi. Mountains meaning the landmass. And sea, not necessarily the ocean. It could also be streams, it could be lakes, it could be ponds. And one of the great benefits is not only that you're using your resources fully, that you're being eco-sensitive, but also that you're balancing nutrients. Because the very same calcium, for example, that you get from dairy products on the land is not the same as what you get from wakame, which is part of the sea. And having both of them as part of your diet will improve the ability for your body to use those nutrients. So being able to source food from different locations is also important. So we can finally get to where I really want to be now that you've got that background. And that is about what I consider to be the very heart, the core of washoku, which is the seasonal sensibility. And there's really two components, and it's not either or. They both coexist. There's nature's bounty, and then there's there's people's creativity. And one can't exist without the other. They play into each other. In terms of nature's bounty, I want to talk a bit about hashiri, shun. It's unfortunate that in English there's not an umlaut, So it's pronounced shun instead of shun, which would mean to avoid. This is something you want to embrace, shun. It's the peak of flavor. And nagori, which is this lingering desire. So we'll talk a bit about that. And then talk about people's creativity, how they take that bounty from nature and how they feed themselves. And part of that human activity is to celebrate certain events throughout the year. And they are referred to as nenju gyoji. Gyoji as things that people create, they're events. I'll have a chance to talk about Hina Matsuri, which is just around the corner. And also talk about Oshogatsu, probably the most important New Year's for the Japanese. And then I want to talk about different ways of experiencing it, motifs, designs, different ways that you can incorporate the seasonal sensibility into your own food. So, it's going to be a very personal journey I'm sharing with you. At this time of year, how many people like yakimo? Yakimo, and how many of you know about benitenshi? This variety that is extraordinary. So, it's on its way out, folks, lingering desire. I know that when I go to the supermarket tomorrow, my supermarket sells them, that I will buy another one. It won't be as great as it was a month ago. But I know I can't have another until probably the middle or end of October. And I don't want to wait that long. So I'm going to go buy another one. That's what nagori is all about at table. It's this lingering desire. You're just not willing to let go yet. Okay? So for those people who haven't yet experienced benitenshi, the red angel, variety of yakimo, go out there and find it in the next couple of days, because by March they're not going to be out there anymore. It's well worth it. Anywhere from 200 to 350 yen a piece, but they're well worth it. They're creamy, they're delicious, they're sweet, they're incredible. I love yakimo. So a bit more elegant, shun, the time of the peak of flavor, is kinmeidai. And one of the reasons why, it's one of my favorite fish dishes anyway, but one of the reasons why I wanted to show it to you is, can you already see where there's the bounty of the sea and the bounty of the landmass combined? That's gobo, a burdock root, with which it's stewed and also flavored with ginger. And it's the combination of the two that makes the fish taste better, and the gobo absorbs the flavor of the fish, and it's a wonderful combination. This is not something that you would make when you're in a hurry. And the reason being that in many fish dishes you need to go through a double process, and especially if you've got a root vegetable like gobo or daikon. Buri daikon would be the same kind of process. And that is, you need to get rid of what the Japanese call aku. And when you say the word, it sort of sticks at the back of your throat and you know it's something that you don't want. It's all the froth that comes to the top and sticks, scum, that sticks to the side of the pot as you're cooking. And you need to get rid of it first. And the way the Japanese do that is something called shimofuri, a very elegant word. Frost is falling. It's a way of briefly blanching so that just the surface of the fish turns white as though frost had fallen on it. But you're not losing the flavor of the fish to that water that's going to be thrown out. So you need to do shimofuri first. And then for the gobo, or daikon, or some other root vegetable, in order to get it tender, you need to, what I call parboil, or par-prep it. And what the Japanese use is togijiru. And togijiru is a byproduct of washing rice. Every day you wash rice, and don't throw that water out, it's liquid gold, folks. It can be used for all sorts of things. And one of the things is to tenderize root vegetables. So you've got two pots going. You've got your fish that's frosting, And you've got your root vegetables that are becoming tender and delicious. And what they're really doing is opening up their pores, getting ready to absorb the flavor when they finally get to meet each other. So finally they're going to get to meet each other in the pot and be very briefly cooked together. And then allowed to cool down once and then heated up again. Have you ever noticed how food often tastes better the next day when you heat it up again? And the reason is that flavor transfer happens as things cool down. So you're going to let it cool down and get that flavor incorporated into the foods, and then if you want to serve it hot, you can heat it back up again. But that's a wonderful Kinmei diet, so that's shun. And then I've given each of you a recipe for fukinoto miso. It's a very short season. Sansai is a category of vegetables. This is that bitter palate that the Japanese have, and your body needs that bitter flavors at this time of year as seasons change from the winter into the spring. And indeed, fukinoto often is when there's still snow on the ground. If you go to the supermarket now, you can probably find them. You'll chop them if you follow the recipe. It's not terribly difficult. My favorite way of enjoying it is dengaku, to slather it on top of tofu and put it under the broiler. You can even use an oven toaster to finish it off. Put the skewers in afterwards. They'll burn in the oven toaster. And it's delicious. It'll keep for quite a while so that you can enjoy that moment of shun a little bit more extended than you can actually find it at the market. So there are a lot of foods where the Japanese will take shun, they'll grab the moment, that peak of flavor, and it's not so much as preserving it as capturing it and being able to enjoy it a bit later in the season. And then there's hashiri, which is this eager anticipation, I can't wait for takenoko to come on the market. And with many foods, the Japanese will do what I call totally takenoko. They'll make everything, a whole meal out of just takenoko. As a matter of fact, I do a program, unfortunately all the places are filled with folks, for this year for takenoko zukushi, where we make a whole meal just out of takenoko, as well as cooking it from the start. And as I point out, there are different parts of the vegetable. Takenoko, it's certainly true, it's also true of daikon. A lot of vegetables have many personalities, have many different options within the single vegetable. And so one of the other characteristics of washoku, as has been practiced for centuries, if not millennia, is to take a single food and give it many personalities. So this is about that goho, changing the different ways of presenting it. But this is just a small example of the different kinds of things that could be made. The picture up on the top is relatives from Kagawa, from the Sanuki, send us takenoko, and really, really delicious stuff. And you're going to gorge on it because it's a short season, you can't really enjoy it. And if you've not yet experienced fresh bamboo shoots, forget about canned and what you thought they tasted like, because it's just nothing like it at all. You must experience this while you're here. So the whole notion behind the original Iron Chef was, and it was at the time in the 90s here in Japan, almost sacrilegious that people would make fun of this notion of making a tsukushi or zukushi menu, a menu out of something, just a single ingredient. In cooking schools, often you are also presented with not a black box because you sort of know what the teacher is going to give you, but very few ingredients, and you're asked to make a 12-course meal out of it. That's a very typical Japanese cooking learning experience, is to use very few ingredients and try to make them into many different kinds of ways. But when you've got an ingredient like takenoko, which has such a short season, and you really need to experience it all because you're not going to be able to have it for another whole year, making a whole menu based on takenoko makes a lot of sense, at least to me it does. So, now into Hina Matsuri. I'm just going to quickly take another sip of water. So, the origins of Hina Matsuri, there are lots of different stories, if you will, but what they all have in common is that weather was not just a casual conversation piece. I had returned to Japan the day before we got that very bizarre weather. I had been in the United States on business and had just come back to Japan. We had that bizarrely warm Sunday. And I had come from Denver, Colorado, 32 inches of snow and a blizzard, and I couldn't believe not only that I had come to a different country, my own home back here again, but what was happening out there. It was those odd quirks of nature that got people concerned about planting for the new year, for the spring, and preparing the earth for it. And most cultures that were agriculturally based have some event or some series of stories about preparing the earth to become fertile and have a good harvest. And indeed, the origins of Hina Matsuri were probably in a similar kind of ritual. At some point, things that could possibly go wrong took the form of dolls, and they were floated down the stream to get rid of the bad and evil possibilities. And there are still parts of Japan, most notably Tottori, anybody here from Tottori? Originally, that still does Nagashibina, where they actually float the dolls down the stream. But the merchants of old Edo, of Tokyo, were known not for their stinginess, but their thrift. The dolls got so elaborate they didn't want to throw them out. Sort of floating them down the stream was mottai-nai, why should I be doing that? We'll save them and we'll just show them at that time of year. And that's where, along about the 17th, 18th century, it became common to save and display rather than to get rid of. But there's a gorgeous set upstairs if you haven't taken a look at them yet, and they have a wonderful explanation there as well. Also, if you hear the melody, you can have the song to read. I gave you that. And the picture that I have here actually belongs to my daughter. My husband comes from a large family, but in her generation, she's the only female with the Andoh last name. So she was lavish, even though she has lots of cousins, she was lavished with the dolls. And this picture actually came from a display we were in New York for a number of years as a family, and that came from that era. The picture and the explanation that I provided you has to do with this set. It's a little bit different, and you will see regional differences and also household differences in the way in which the dolls are displayed. But there are certain foods that are associated with Hina Matsuri, and the way in which they're actually prepared and displayed and served might be slightly different. But almost always there's some form of chirashi sushi or bara sushi, and sometimes it takes different forms. Down here is chirashi sushi looking like little clams in little round, thin sheets of omelet. Here that omelet is made into the kimono for two little dolls. Here the shape is hishigata, or diamond shape. Anybody know why diamond shapes are associated with Hina Matsuri? Hishi-no-mi. Hishi-no-mi was a food that was used to ease birth pains. And in general, Hina Matsuri has to do with fertility and with girls, with women. And clams are a female symbol as opposed to matsutake, which are male. And why you also have clams associated with, and the shape of clams associated with Hina Matsuri. But it's also the season, the shun, that moment. And you're going to have foods, this is not broccoli, but rather nanohana, broccoli lab, or something similar to it, and the foods of that season that are going to be prepared. But the appearance, the shape, the combinations, all of them are very uniquely Hina Matsuri. Also the temari sushi. these little teeny tiny bite-sized ones. Girls used to play with temari, the little thread balls, and that was also associated, and anything miniature is often associated with Hina Matsuri as well. Probably the most celebrated, meaning people would not ignore it. They might be too busy and sort of let Hina Matsuri pass, but they're not going to let Oshogatsu, New Year's, pass, and they're not going to let osechi not happen. There's something wrong about that grammar, but you know what I mean. Osechi are the very special holiday foods. They're usually served in a jubako, stacked layers on top of each other. Those are two of the inner layers that came from, every year I do a tasting at the end of the year of jubako, because so many people don't make osechi. I love making osechi. And getting a chance to really find out about it, especially the resident foreign community don't always get a chance. And when they see the price tags at the department store, they think maybe there's an extra zero, and the answer is no, there's no extra zero. That's what it costs to buy them. And I teach people how to carve their carrots to look like neji ume as well. So those came from class, I think, two years ago. But what I want to focus on now are certain symbolic meanings attached to what's known as iwai sakana, or these very celebratory tidbits. The sakana here is not fish, but the tidbit meaning. And kuromame, or sweet black beans, is a pun, if you will. Kuro is black, but also kuro, some of this, it's hard work. Mame is a bean, but it's also mame ni naru, kashikoi. You're going to be very clever, hard-working. And the idea being that if you work hard and are earnest, you get your reward of the sweet bean. The tazukuri are two characters meaning to prepare the fields, and they are the little sardines. Of all of the foods that I found bizarre, the first time I ate them in Japan, tazukuri was one of them. Why would anybody make candy out of fish? Dried fish. But I tasted them and loved them. They're one of my favorite osechi things, and I make very good ones too. Give you a recipe for that as well. But the tazukuri had to do again with preparing the field and making sure that there was going to be bounty and a good harvest in the year to come. And kazunoko, or herring roe, is literally thousands and thousands of children, and again it's a fertility symbol. So in terms of wanting good things to happen, to reward you for your hard and earnest endeavors in the year past, and in order to prepare you for a good year, they became the symbolic foods. And it's interesting, just like in America, there aren't a whole lot of people who love turkey and cranberry sauce, but when it comes to Thanksgiving, they feel they have to eat it. I often think there are lots of Japanese who don't love osechi, but at New Year's they feel they have to eat it. And that's part of what this gyoji is all about. There are these symbolic, imbued with special meanings that people give the meaning to those events and to those foods, but they become very important to pass down to others. For a number of years towards the end of my husband's career, he's retired now, we lived in Osaka as well. And it was very interesting to me to see the difference in regional take on a lot of the foods. Because down in Osaka at New Year's time, almost everybody had tataki gobo, which was the burdock root with sesame, really delicious, and kobomaki, or kelp roll. Sometimes there were fish on the inside, sometimes there were vegetables on the inside. Most often there was nothing. It was just the kombu and kampyo, gourd, that was tying it up. So even though there are certain foods that would be zenkoku, that would be all over Japan, there were also some individual foods that would be different. And that's especially true of ozoni, which becomes brunch on New Year's Day. Depending upon where in Japan you are, what you put in the soup, whether the soup is going to be a clear broth or whether it's going to be miso thickened. And also the time of day that you're going to eat it is going to change tremendously. Basically, there's the Kanto, the Tokyo area style, and the Kansai, Kyoto, Osaka, Nara, Kobe, that area as well. And miso thickened broth is more common in the Kansai. A clear broth is more common in Tokyo. Boiled omochi is more common in the Kansai. And grilling it is more common here in the Tokyo, Kanto area. And it's interesting, my daughter was born and early raised in Tokyo, and her favorite style is the Edo fu ozoni. And even though she's living in New York, she makes ozoni, and she makes it with chicken broth and grilled omochi, and she does it her way. When she comes back to visit, on Ganjitsu, on the first day, we do it Kansai style, because my husband and I both prefer the miso-thickened broth. And then on the second day, we'll do it her way. So we sort of alternate back and forth. But what's interesting is that everywhere in Japan, people eat ozoni. But depending upon where you are, it's going to be different. And that's also another characteristic of these foods that are associated, and they're really human creativity. People make these ideas, and they create these habits, these customs, and follow them along. So, what anybody can do is take a carrot and make it have a special meaning. And there are all these cute little gadgets that you can buy. It's worth spending the extra money for the aritsugu ones. They're the knife makers in Kyoto who make the really good vegetable cutters. The 100-yen chop will not last you very long. Maybe 1 or 2 carrots, and that's about it. And they come in all different shapes that have very specific associations and meaning. And it's a very simple way of adding a seasonal sensibility to your menu, whether the menu is Japanese food or not. So in the fall, you're going to cut them to look like maple leaves. In the spring, this is a petal from, there's 5 of these that make up a sakura. And the difference between sakura and ume is, they each have 5 petals, but the notch, yeah, the little dimple in there. That's the sakura. And for ume, if you're wanting to make it really fancy, you carve it and you take out these pieces and make it sort of a 3-dimensional, especially when you boil them, they look like they did in the other picture, and they're known as neji ume, or twisted, turned ume. And it's a way of introducing a seasonal sensibility, even if you're just having peas and carrots with your meatloaf, whatever. It's a fun kind of thing to do. Another way is with tabletop accessories. And probably hashioki, or chopstick rests, are the easiest, simplest, least expensive way to start bringing this seasonal sensibility into your life. It's a good collection to start with. The ones on the right, I think, are very obviously all from the fall. And they're all from my personal collection. I didn't put the slide here of my drawer with chopsticks and hashioki. And everybody who comes to a program is always amazed when they open that drawer and see the variety. And depending upon the time of year, the choices are going to be different. And when there's a sumo match, I'll have out my sumo wrestlers that are out there. And in the summer, I have different kinds of uchiwa, different kinds of fans, and I have watermelon that's been bitten into, and all sorts of fun little things that just sort of add a flavor to it. What are these guys? And when we packed up from Osaka, they got lost, so I don't have them anymore. What are they?
Rabbits.
They're little rabbits. And when would they appear at table in Japan? In the fall. They have nothing to do with Easter. Yeah, nothing to do with Easter. So it's a very interesting thing that for many, it's interesting. So in my drawer, the things that are not in season are in the back. And every once in a while, people are really curious, and they'll start opening up boxes in the back, and they'll take out something. And I remember one spring, somebody said, "Oh, this is for Easter." And I said, "Mm-mm. There's a bunny rabbit up in the moon, and that's what this is all about in Asia, particularly in Japan. And so that's skimmy bunny rabbits that are looking at the fall moon. And as you can see, I love kuri, all different kinds of wonderful things. It's just a wonderful way to add another touch to your table. Another is through Obento. So although you might have your ichiju sansai, you might have your 5 different dishes, you might have different foods in different utsuwa, into the containers themselves, another is a way of organizing it into an Obento. And each and every one of them, go look in the Depachika, the department store food hall again, at the prepared foods, and especially throughout the year, if you take a look, you will see, now that you're looking for these things, you will see all of these signs of the season. The midsummer one, obviously the shun, you've got fresh corn, you've got okra, you've got your fresh edamame, your soybeans, and anybody know what's mixed in with the rice here? Shiso, yukari, shiso. And what does the shiso come from? You'll see in a moment, from pickling plums. It's a byproduct of pickling plums. And the notion also of using these byproducts, the togijiru, to help soften root vegetables, nothing goes to waste in the Japanese kitchen. It's really a marvelous system. It's its own ecosystem within the kitchen. So this is yukari gohan, and what's interesting is it's been shown scientifically. A number of years ago, there was a problem in Japan with E. coli in the summer. And one of the things that they showed was that an umeboshi, pickled plum, and or yukari, within a 5-centimeter radius of it in an obento, E. coli was dead. It did not take effect. And indeed, the ancient wisdom was, in the summer, to avoid spoilage and food poisoning, was to add either umeboshi as the hinomaru bento, you have it in the middle, or to have yukari gohan. And actually, yukari gohan is more effective because it's being tossed throughout the rice. So very common in summer, midsummer, obento. Over here, I want to just very briefly talk about another wonderful, fun aspect. Not everything in the kitchen is serious, you know. There's modoki. And modoki is a very sort of elegant, poetic word, remembrance. And unfortunately, in English, there's no positive word for modoki. There's either fake, imitation. It's all very deceptive. And this has nothing to do with deception. It has to do with playfulness. So what does this look like? A little persimmon. What do you think it's made of? It's not a persimmon. It's a really fun little thing. I didn't make that up into but it's a fun thing. It's uzurano tamago, so it's a little teeny tiny quail egg, and it's been dyed that color in kuchinashinomi, gardenia pods. And on top is a piece of kombu, kelp, left over from making dashi. It's not meant to deceive, it's just for fun. So what's this little kago, this little, it's kombu, again, that was woven into a little basket and then deep fried to hold chips that look like maple leaves, but they're really from satsumaimo. They're from, so instead of just yakimo, you can also have those. You have ginan. You've got all different kinds of wonderful things that are just playful. And then you have rice, which is always part of the meal, but it's shaped in a fall motif. If this were the spring, it might be looking like a cherry blossom. If it were the summer, it might be as an uchiwa, because it would cool you. In the fall, perhaps a hyotan, or gourd, whatever they're used. The other food is something called ofu, namafu, which is wheat gluten, and it really has no flavor. It's just a texture, it's a mouthfeel. And it's different colors depending on the different time of year. So if there had been a piece of ofu here, it would have been green maple, or possibly a bamboo sasa instead. So it's going to be the color, the motif, everything is going to convey that seasonal sensibility. So Obento is another wonderful canvas on which you can paint this picture, this landscape, at any given time of year. So anybody who does tsukkémono, and particularly anybody here have a nukodoko? Okay. It's the rhythm of the kitchen. And talk about seasonal sensibility, it has to do with when you do things. In most of the programs, I give people nukazuke kyuri, cucumber, because it's a pickle that they usually like. It's not particularly challenging in the taste and aroma and all the rest of it. And then I ask them when they think it was put in the pot. And I get lots of different answers. I got everything from 2 months ago to yesterday to whatever. If it's in the summer, it was maybe 3 or 4 hours before the class. Maybe 6 o'clock in the morning if we were going to be serving it, tops. And probably would have waited, almost no people showed up at 10 o'clock to put it in. It's going to go that fast. In the winter, the night after I finish dinner, I'm putting in the stuff for the next night. So the rhythm of when you're going to be doing this is going to change. The actual things that you put in might change also. Now, definitely, I'm a kabu person, and I love also to do the tops of the kabu as well. And you might have seasonal different vegetables that were going to go into the nuka pot at different times of year, but also the timing, the rhythm of when you're going to do this. There's not a whole lot in the washoku kitchen that's really difficult to do. It's a question of knowing when to do it. Also how, but when. Namely, when to get started, when to start doing these things. So the other is pickling, or umegoshi, umeshimoto. And this is on our balcony, trying to capture some of the sun. They're really good batch last year. I'm hoping that this year will be as good. And that's not sugar, that's salt. That's going into the ume. And indeed, the liquid has risen, and that's when akajiso is added. And fresh akajiso, actually making momijiso, is very messy but very wonderful. And every once in a while I get people who also are into dyeing and weaving and makes gorgeous yarn and thread and cloth, yukari. The aku that you have to throw off that you can't eat. It's a gorgeous color for that. But then it gets dried separately and then added together and then eventually pickled. And long after the plums have been eaten, you still have the yukari. You dry it. I used to try to do it naturally. It's very hard to do naturally, especially in an urban setting. And I'm mindful of the use of electricity, but I still like to have my yukari. So I do a session where I dry out a fair amount of it and have that available. More difficult and less successful, I'll admit, is takuan. And my husband's giggling in the back. This year was not great. We're eating it, but it's not, I admit, it's not great. It's not worth bragging about, that's for sure. It's a much more complicated process and more difficult to manage. But one of the things about tsukkémono, I often say that my early experiences in the Japanese kitchen were pickling across a cultural divide, experiencing umeshimoto with other people, making tsukkémono with other people was a way of interacting that would not otherwise. That and the sento, the public bath, or my early experiences of really delving into Japanese culture in a very different kind of way. But making takuan is all about a seasonal rhythm as well, and being able to keep it. We did scrape off the blue mold that had risen to the top. Afterwards, blue mold is okay, pink is not. You should throw out the whole batch. But it teaches you something about nature and about human creativity that you would not otherwise experience. It's also interesting to me that the Japanese have two words for experience. There's keiken and taiken. And the tai has karada. It's really viscerally experiencing something. Keiken is sort of more cerebral. It's something that you can learn, but you don't necessarily experience. And I think that a lot of washoku needs to be experienced to really enjoy it and to benefit from it. So I have, my main website is tasteofculture.com. I try to fairly regularly update the kitchen culture page. Go there now and you'll find out more about Hina Matsuri. And you'll also get a link to a video that I made a few years ago making temari sushi from that page. And I will change them regularly, or at least I try to. Washoku-cooking.com is all about washoku, and kansha-cooking.com is, kansha turned vegan because the publisher wanted it to be vegan. And that was perfectly fine with me because I thought that vegetables were a great way of demonstrating the message behind kansha, which is using food fully. I prefer that expression to the Japanese really is mottainai, or it's a shame, it's a waste, but I prefer the positive way of explaining it as using food fully, being able to use every bit of everything. And Kibo, as we're up against the 5th anniversary of the disaster up in the Tohoku, can I do a personal plug? I'm going to ask, it's E only, and I'm going to ask you to buy it. It's, I think, $3.99 on the English language one. And the money goes up to the Tohoku to jumpstart new industry. And it's all about the food of the Tohoku. I had wanted to do something before the food culture up there disappeared because people were dispersing and people had other things, more important things to deal with in the immediate. And it was a part of Japan that I had very little connection with before the disaster. And the more I learned about the food of the Tohoku, the more fascinated I became by it. And got a chance to put a few very key ideas and notions about also some stories about food and how it connects. And would love to have Q&A now, but I'm not great at returning emails, but you can try me at Andoh@tasteofculture.com. Notice that Andoh is spelled A-N-D-O-H. Was married in 1969, a while back, and in those days, that's how they spelled Andoh. They removed the H just about the time that our daughter was born in 75, and we had to petition to have both names on her Japanese passport, A-N-D-O and A-N-D-O-H, because the H had to match her American passport. So it's the old-fashioned way of spelling Andoh. Okay. So, questions, comments, curiosities? I can't say for sure how many centuries have gone into my nuka pot, but if even a grain of the starter was from my mother-in-law's mother-in-law, we're talking a ways back. And thankfully, along the way, it has not been properly kept. And thankfully, one of the sister-in-laws always had some of it so we could sort of jumpstart each other's. And for people who come to my TSUKÉMONO workshop, which I do every summer, people who want to make the commitment to keeping a nuka pot, it's a commitment, are welcome to take some of mine as their starter. It's interesting how the different flavors develop and households have their own flavor. It's a constantly monitored batch. Do you know what nuka is?
Wheat. Is it grown from the rice?
From rice. Yeah. So nothing goes to waste in the Japanese kitchen. When genmai, whole grain rice, is hulled to make hakumai, or white rice, you're removing the nuka. And that nuka is used as the pickling medium. And I wrote a story, I wonder if it's still on bento.com. At one point it was a story that I wrote for the Yomiuri newspaper like 15, 20 years ago, about jump-starting the nuka pot. And the best way to do it is with beer.
Yeah. It's a bit like a levain in France, is it?
Sort of. I think every culture has its own cultured foods, and their starters. I would liken it almost like a sourdough bread starter that might also have been for generations in a family, in a bakery. And certainly many of the kojikin, the rice bacillus that starts a lot of things like miso, shoyu, has certainly had generations. And it's a way of managing it. But being involved in pickling, it makes you realize nature and its power and human ingenuity and its cleverness to make the two come together into something that's really worth eating. It's an amazing process to experience, so I definitely encourage people to just start doing that. Any questions? Well, sometimes, and I debated giving out also some charts of different, what comes in and out of season in different places, but that's information that you can discover on the internet. What I'm hoping you're going to take away from this evening is a sensibility and a desire to participate in this sense of season and to gain the pleasure of being able to see evidence of it all around you and to actually engage with it. I often will say you don't have to be Japanese, and you don't necessarily have to live in Japan to practice washoku and to enjoy it. It's something that everybody can do, and indeed in the introduction to washoku, I did have a paragraph about a soup and a sandwich made in a washoku mindset. So it doesn't even have to be Japanese food. It's this notion of taking your food and pulling it together and creating an experience, and one that's going to be pleasurable. And I personally think that it's an easy way to get dinner on the table if you just sort of count through this little rhythm that you have. In terms of people coming into new foods, I will, if there's an obvious example of something that it's like or it's not like, I will probably offer that. But so often there is no equivalent when it comes to Japan, that you just have to say, give it a go. You don't have to swallow it, you don't even have to finish it, but just try it. See what you think. And then be able to explain to them that it's really only available just now. Aren't you lucky that you came to visit at this time of year? And that's going to be true no matter who visits you at any time of year. People often will ask me, what's the best time to visit Japan? The answer is anytime. Anytime. And for me, the only benefit of surviving the rainy season, I hate the rainy season. My hair frizzes, it's just mold in the closet, is biwa, one of my very favorite fruits. And you can only enjoy biwa loquats if you survive the rainy season. So it's sort of its own reward for its own season. But to be more in tune with the season in your kitchen and how you're experiencing it. For giving me the opportunity to vent a bit as well. And one of the very first questions that I ask people who sign up for a program is if they have any special food issues. I don't care what the reason is, I just need to know what it is. Okay? for example, if you're going gluten-free, eating shojin ryori and ofu is absolutely out of the question. So once you know where you stand, you can start making these decisions. But I would say that there's two sets of issues in your question. One which you may or may not make headway, depending upon how hard you try to communicate. And the other which is, I'm not asking you to give up, but you're knocking on the wrong door, because it's just not going to happen. And so I'll start with it's just not going to happen. And that is, in Japan, people don't like to make mistakes. And if they've never done it before, it's likely they're not going to get it right the first time. And they're never eager to use an okyaku-san, and especially one who's going to constantly send them business, to try that out. So very often people will refuse to do something because they're not sure they can do it well. So that's something that exists out there. It's not just related to food. And that's what it is. Related to food. I think that you could possibly be more informative in a reassuring way on both sides of the equation, both in terms of your intake and offering specific options to people, and then finding appropriate facilities that are willing to meet those requirements, such as shojin ryori is. I mean, if you're talking about just vegetarian or vegan, and there's not a gluten issue, shojin ryori, there are lots of good places that you could approach. They would be delighted to do that. So I think it has to do more with your being careful on the intake and understanding what the issues are, and also you're being able to approach appropriate places that are willing to do that for you. But it's always a challenge. And I don't do a whole lot of it anymore, but earlier on in my career, I did a lot of what's known as kaisetsu, or commentary, where an establishment would bring me in to give a constant commentary to people as they were eating. Or when chefs would perform at large conferences outside Japan, it wasn't really translating, it was commentary. You had to be able to fill in the gap. And it was always what I called the wow factor. I knew I was successful if the audience said, wow. It means they got it. It really was going to work. But ganbatte, you've got your challenges out there, but there are also tremendous opportunities, I think, especially with the coming of the Olympics and the rest of it. So I see it as a huge area of opportunity. I just think you need to be a little bit more careful on the intake and who you approach. But shojin, if I may for a moment, for people who don't know, really doesn't mean vegetarian. Shojin has to do with this earnest endeavor. And it turned out to be the label that was put on the food that the monks were eating. But the actual notion of shojin nitsutomaru is very different. It has nothing to do with eating vegetables. It has to do with looking for the pure sense of the food, using it without waste, with the sense and notion of kansha. But the classic traditional gomi was as stated. Umami is really the experience of flavor. And it's your ability to experience. Umami is not a taste that you can have by eating something or not eating something. It is latent flavor that needs to be drawn out of foods and experienced. And I know that there are lots of people who put six, tanmi is the other expression that's used for it, iwai, usui flavor. The whole notion of drawing out the flavor, the carrot that you cook should taste like a better carrot if you're preparing it well. And that's the carrot's umami. Something that can help accomplish that is using kobudashi, kelp broth, because Kombu has a lot of umami seibun. And umami seibun are glutamates. They're not always the bad guys. Sometimes they're okay if they're not monosodium glutamate. Okay? But glutamates are actual quantifiable chemicals that exist in different quantities in different foods, and certain foods are richer in umami seibun than others. But no, I don't think of it as a sixth flavor. And neither did the classic Japanese kitchen. But definitely umami is the buzzword out there now. I'm not particularly knowledgeable of spirits and sake, shochu, and the others. I have often coordinated programs with people who are experts and do pairing, because the notion of pairing food and beverage, I don't think has a long, deep history in Japan. I think it was a notion that was from the outside of Japan. And this whole idea that somehow you would select a particular sake to serve with a particular menu. I think that much like the utsuwa, the actual vessels in which food is served in Japan, and often you will have at table mixed styles, colors, designs, that by Western notions of design principles are a little confusing. Each is unto itself. And I think that probably whoever was planning the menu decided this is a great sake, I want people to really enjoy it. And it happens to be this time of year, so this I think would be a great thing to serve with it. I'm not sure that the notion of pairing per se is something that every drinking establishment is into. I think that there are some where you can get a flight of sake to go with. It's interesting, different parts of Japan, those little tidbits are often called different things. Down in Osaka, it's ate. Anybody know why? Ate. Those little tidbits that you eat. Anyway, down in the Kansei, that's how they refer to it. So I'm not sure, depending on the establishment, I'm not sure that it's intentional. I think that they may have certain connections with certain breweries, and that's why they have those. The same is also true, by the way, with tea and the different flavors of tea. I think that certain kinds of tea, whether you're talking about gyocha, just green tea, or perhaps hojicha, which is the roasted tea, have certain associations with certain foods, but I'm not sure that the notion of pairing a particular vintage and location of a beverage and a food is deeply ingrained in washoku. I think each is unto its own. To me, the Japanese kitchen is a place where things can happen quickly and simply if you just grasp a few basic notions, but it's also a place where if you've got the time and the inclination, you can lavish this creative energy. And so part of my love of the washoku and notion is that it could go either way. So hopefully most people, the reason why when they open up their refrigerator there's almost nothing there is not because they can't afford the food, but because they didn't have time to go shopping or whatever. They're too busy. So for people who are terribly busy, there's a certain set of patterns that you can create and pull together meals very quickly. The labor-intensive end is something like the simmered fish with vegetables, which is not something that I would make if I was in a hurry. But I would make it over the weekend and serve it 3 days later, knowing that, on Wednesday I was going to not have time to go shopping or do something else. There's all sorts of, not shortcuts, because you're not sacrificing anything. There are simpler ways of doing things. And I would encourage you to think about color, flavor, and method. And pick something to start with. Either because you're at the market and it really catches your eye, and that's going to be the focal point of your meal, or because you didn't go shopping and that's it. You got eggs in the refrigerator, so now what? The answer is the eggs can be wonderful, and they can be done in many different ways. They can become the focus. You could do them, simmered. And usually deciding upon the ingredient and the best way to prepare it, that method, is the start of menu planning. And you'll find as you're doing this that, putting a piece of parsley, it's green, it's bitter, I got it set. I've got all of my elements that I was looking for. Or a salad, putting a tomato on top of it, it's tart, it's red, it's nama, it's raw. That's just what was missing, and it'll come together. So I think it's a question of practice. I refer to it as practicing washoku and getting an experience of it, and then figuring out what things are easy for you to make. What color are they? What method would you be using? What sort of flavor profile do they have? And trying to combine different elements to it. My absolute shortcut, and it's tonight when I go home, is takikomi gohan. Because it's pretty much the best way to clean out the refrigerator, little bits and pieces that are left, that little bit of gobo, that little bit of carrot that's at the end, even the peels will do. And it's flavorful, it's filling, and you can also introduce some seasonal element. And the other day I found yellow carrots and still had kintoki, the red carrots, and orange ones. So my takikomi gohan tonight has 3 colored carrots in it. It's really neat. So I find that that's a method, and the rice cooker is doing the work as we speak. It's set, timed for it, so I don't have to worry about it afterwards. Not at all. I'll start from the end. One of the committees that I sat on, you have to understand that in Japan, once you reach a certain age, you're past kandeki, so you're for real, and you're a woman, and you're a gaijin, and you can read Japanese. Wow, we got to sit around a committee, because then we've got kokusai-ka, we've got this international presence. So one of the committees that I sat on was very enlightening, was about food safety, and it was at the time that they were debating whether there was a need to require that certain allergens be listed on labels in Japan. And the reason for that was there was several very unfortunate, a girl who actually had an EpiPen and nobody in the school knew how to use it, and she died, anaphylactic shock. So the answer is there are all sorts of food issues, and they really became very obvious in the 1990s, I'm going to say, that they became almost a political issue in Japan about food safety. And now it is required that certain allergens be listed, things like peanuts, like shellfish, and now that there's a larger Muslim population, pork, and anything that might have a pork thing. So it's not that the issues don't exist, it's that they were not politicized to the point of requiring it to be on labels and requiring that when you get your license to be a chef in a restaurant, that you're required to learn about it. All of that is changing, has changed, and is changing, and will continue to change. There's no difference in the percentage of the population who does or does not have.
Thank you, Andoh, for the talk, and thank you everyone for the wonderful questions.